Okay, Merry Christmas, everyone. Um, okay, so nag-ubra ako sa PowerPoint and I figured how to record myself and with the PowerPoint man, no? Para mas manami. Okay. So, Object Relations Theory by Melanie Klein. So, Melanie Klein's object relations theory emphasizes the significance of early relationships, especially between an infant and the mother, so in shaping personality and development. So, according to Klein, these relationships from the foundation for how individuals perceive and interact with others throughout life. She suggested that the infant's mind is shaped by the emotional quality of interactions with primary caregivers, particularly the mother. So, unlike Sigmund Freud, who focused on biological drives such as the libido and aggression, si Klein naman, she argued that the infant's emotional bonds and interpersonal relationships are more central to personality development. And she also introduced the concept of internal objects, which are mental representation of significant people like the mother, so based on early experiences. So these internalized images influence how individuals relate to themselves and others. Also, Klein emphasized the importance of early psychological processes like splitting, so where infants divide their perception of others into good and bad parts based on how their needs are met or not met. So, for instance, a good breast may represent the nurturing aspect of the mother, so while a bad breast symbolizes frustration or deprivation. So, kay Melanie, ang iyang mga contributions, personal influences, so personal losses and interest in psychoanalysis. So Melanie Klein experienced significant personal losses during her early life, so including the deaths of her father and brother. So these losses like shape her interest in understanding human behavior, particularly the emotional impacts of loss and separation. So Klein's focus on psychoanalysis may have been an attempt to make sense of her own grief and interpersonal experiences, so which informed her theories about early relationship attachment and emotional development. So, for example, Klein's theory emphasizes how early relationship with caregivers influence an individual's ability to cope with loss and anxiety. So, her own losses may have provided a deeply personal lens through which she explored how individuals internalize experiences of absence or abandonment. Okay, so Klein was able to develop play therapy. Klein is credited with pioneering play therapy. She's a revolutionary method for working with children in psychoanalysis. So recognizing that children cannot articulately, express their thoughts and feelings as adults do. So she developed a therapeutic approach that uses play as a language. Toys and creative materials serve as symbolic tools for children to express their unconscious emotions, conflicts, and desires. So, examples of Klein's play therapy in practice, case of a child with separation anxiety. So, imagine a child struggling with separation anxiety due to parents' prolonged absence. So, in a play therapy session, the child might use a doll to recreate scenarios where the doll is abandoned or reunited with its caregiver. So, the therapist observes this play to uncover the child's unconscious fears about abandonment and helps the child process their emotions. So, through the play, the therapist might notice recurring themes of fear and reassurance, which could guide intervention to help the child develop coping mechanisms. Um, Example, exploring sibling rivalry. So another child might express jealousy or rivalry toward a younger sibling through play. So they might use toy animals to depict aggression or dominance. So acting out scenarios where one animal excludes or attacks another. So the therapist could use this to explore the child's feelings of being overshadowed and and work together, fostering understanding and acceptance of their emotions. Okay, so the connection between loss and play therapy. So clients' early experiences of loss might have heightened her sensitivity to children's emotional struggles. So especially around themes of separations, rejection, and grief. So her focus on using play as a tool allowed children to express what they might not yet have words for. So making her method transformative in the field of child psychoanalysis. So her innovations laid the groundwork for many modern therapeutic approaches that help children process trauma, loss, and emotional challenges in a safe and supportive environment. Okay, so for the introduction to object relations therapy, um, in Klein's theory, objects refer to both actual people, such as caregivers, and the mental representation of symbols of those people in the infant's mind. So these representations are not necessarily accurate reflections but are shaped by the infant's experiences and perception. So, for instance, the good breast symbolizes nurturing and satisfying aspects of the mother, while the bad breast represents frustrations or deprivation when the infant's needs are not met. So, for example, an infant who is consistently comforted and fed by their mother may internalize the good breast as a symbol of safety and love. So, this positive internal object becomes the foundation for trust and secure relationships in adulthood. So, an infant who experiences neglect might internalize the bad breast, so potentially leading to feelings of insecurity and mistrust in future relationships. So, may epekto siya sa future. So, this is like may similarity sila ni Freud. So, interpersonal focus. Clients emphasize the intimacy and nurturing in mother infant relationship as the cornerstone of psychological development. She argued that the quality of these early interactions directly impacts the infant's emotional health and ability to form relationships later in life. So, example, if a mother is consistently attentive to her baby's needs, the infant learns to associate caregivers with comfort and security. So, this fosters emotional resilience. On the other hand, inconsistent or neglectful caregiving might lead the infant to develop anxiety or ambivalence in their future and their personal connections. So, emphasis on relationships, overdrives, Klein diverged from Freud's focus on biological drives like sexual pleasure, instead asserting that human behavior is primarily motivated by the need for connection and relationships. So Klein's believed, infants instinctively seek closeness and relatedness with caregivers. And these early bonds shape the development of the self. So, example, a child might cling to their mother not because of an innate drive, but because they derive emotional comfort and security from the relationship. If this bond is disrupted, the child might develop difficulties in forming close connections with others later in life. Okay, now the fantasies, no, the fantasies, the fantasies with PH. So Klein introduced the idea of unconscious fantasies uh, in infants. So these are innate, unconscious mental images or scenarios that reflect the infant's emotional experiences. So, for example, an infant might unconsciously fantasize about attacking the bad breast when they feel hunger or frustration. Example, an infant denied feeding might unconsciously fantasize about biting or destroying the bad breast. So these fantasies, through irrational, play a role in how the infant processes complex emotions like love, hate, and dependency, influencing their mental development and future relationship. Okay, so the integration of concepts in real life. Imagine a child who has experienced inconsistent caregiving. In therapy, their behaviors might reveal internal conflicts stemming from early bad object representation. So, for instance, they might display difficulty trusting adults, rooted in their unconscious fantasies of the uh, caregiver as neglectful. So, by exploring these early object relations, therapists can help in the individual process this conflict and develop healthier ways of relating to others. So, Klein concepts of Klein's concept emphasized the relational nature of human development. So, making her theory a cornerstone for understanding both childhood and adult psychological patterns. Okay. So we have the uh, paranoid schizoid position. Okay, so for the paranoid schizoid position, early developmental stage where the infant splits experiences into good and bad. Okay, and for the depressive position, occurs later when the child integrates good and bad perceptions of the same object. Okay. So Melanie Klein introduced the paranoid schizoid position and the depressive position as key developmental stages in early infancy. So these positions describe the infant's evolving ways of processing emotions and relationship with others. So they reflect the child's ability to handle conflicting emotions and perceptions of caregivers and the world. So, sa paranoid schizoid position, so this is an early developmental stage, typically occurring in the first few months of life. In this phase, the infant splits experiences into extremes of good and bad to cope with overwhelming emotions. So the infant perceives objects like the mother's breast as either entirely nurturing and loving, which is good, or entirely frustrating and harmful, which is bad. So the splitting helps the infant manage anxiety by compartmentalizing positive and negative experiences. So, avoiding the distress of reconciling ambivalence. So, for example, an infant who is fed promptly when hungry perceives the mother's breast as good and nurturing. However, when the infant experiences hunger and discomfort due to delayed feeding, the same breast is perceived as bad and withholding. So at this stage, the infant cannot reconcile that the good and bad experiences come from the same object. Okay, so that becomes the paranoid schizoid position. How about the depressive position? This stage develops later, typically around 6 to 12 months of age. So, as the infant matures emotionally and cognitively, the child begins to integrate the good and bad aspects of the same object. Realizing that the caregiver, example the mother, can be both nurturing and frustrating. So this recognition brings mixed feelings of love and guilt as the child fears they may have harmed the object, which is the mother, through their earlier aggressive fantasies or actions. So the depressive reflects a more mature way of relating, while the child can tolerate ambivalence and develop empathy and concern for others. So kabalo na siya mag-integrate no sang bad kag sang good breast. Okay, so coming from the same breast. Okay, so the same infant from previous examples begins to understand that the mother who occasionally delays feeding is still the same loving and caring figure who provides comfort most of the time. This realization may evoke feelings of guilt for the earlier bad fantasies, such as wanting to attack the mother's breast. The infant might then seek to repair this imagined harm, so showing early signs of concern and attachment. So there's an integration of the two positions. So paranoid schizoid position naman, splitting the good and bad. So nakalain-lain siya. It's like compartmentalized. So a child reacts with extreme anger sa bad object when denied, let's say, a toy, but idealizes the caregiver as good when confronted shortly after. So sa depressive position, the child integrates good and bad experiences, leading to a more balanced view of relationship. So for example, a toddler who experiences a parent as a both strict when disciplining and loving when comforting. So this begins to understand that the parents' strictness comes from care and not rejection. Okay. So let's go to the defense mechanisms. Melanie Klein psychoanalytic theory provides a framework for understanding how infants and individuals manage internal and external experiences through processes like introjection, projection, and splitting. So these mechanisms are central to the development of personality and emotional regulation. For the interjection refers to the process of mentally taking in aspects of external world such as experiences, objects, or relationships and making them part of the internal world. So these internalized objects shape the individual's self-concept and emotional life. It's they're like taking the experiences in, and that becomes internalized na sa ila nga naging shape na sang ila nga concept sa kabuhi kag sang ila nga emotional life. So how about naman sa projection? So sa projection is the process of attributing one's own feelings, desires, or thoughts to external objects or people. So it allows individuals to displace uncomfortable emotions such as aggression or fear onto others. No? So, for example, an infant who feels frustration and aggression may project those feelings onto the mother, perceiving her as hostile or rejecting. So, for instance, a hungry baby who isn't fed immediately might project their anger to their mother, imagining her as intentionally withholding care. How about splitting? So, splitting involves separating objects, like the caregiver, into good and bad categories. So, this process occurs because of the infant is unable to reconcile the two, the ambivalence of experiencing both nurturing and frustrating aspects of the same person. So, splitting helps the infant manage feelings of anxiety by compartmentalizing their experiences. Okay? Uh, okay, now, so over time, okay, so over time, with consistent caregiving, the child learns to integrate these conflicting feelings, realizing that a caregiver is a whole person with both strengths and flaws. So this progression supports emotional resilience and secure relationships. Okay, so if interjection or projection remains distorted or splitting is not resolved, the individual may struggle with black and white thinking of or difficulties managing ambivalence. So for instance, an adult might idealize or devalue others entirely, reflecting unresolved early patterns. Okay? So, ego and super ego in Melanie's Klein, yeah, uh, theory. Melanie Klein diverged from Sigmund Freud's classical psychoanalytic view of the ego and superego by suggesting that these structures develop much earlier in infancy than Freud proposed. So, according to Klein, the infant's mental world is dynamic and involves the early emergence of both ego and superego, which play crucial roles in managing anxiety and forming relationships. The ego, Klein believed that the ego develops very early, even at birth. So, contrary to Freud's notion that it evolves gradually as a child interacts with the external world, in Klein's view, the early ego helps infants process their experiences, manage anxiety, and form relationship with objects. Example, the mother's breast. No? Okay, na mother's breast would be ang gina example because that's the first interaction na be no sa infant, the always the mother. Okay. So ang role dire sang sang ego is instrumental in organizing the infant's experiences into good and bad, aiding the processes of splitting and interjection. So it provides the basis for the infant's perception of the world and relationships even before conscious awareness develops. So, for example, an infant who experiences hunger and satisfaction learns to distinguish between good and bad objects through the early ego. So, when the mother feeds the baby, the ego helps internalize this as a good object that brings comfort and fulfillment. So, when the infant feels hunger or discomfort, the ego may attribute these experiences to a bad object. Sa super ego naman, so Klein argued that the super ego emerges much earlier than Freud suggested, appearing within the first year of life. So, in her view, the superego is initially harsh and producing feelings of terror rather than guilt. So, this harshness reflects the infant's projection of aggressive impulses into the external world, creating a fear of retaliation. So, the role, the early superego embodies the infant's intense fears and anxieties, including the fear of losing the good object, of being harmed by the bad object. So, over time, with consistent caregiving, the superego becomes more balanced and less terrifying. Okay. So, for example, consider an infant who feels aggressive impulses toward the mother during a moment of frustration, such as when feeding is delayed. So, the harsh superego may create a fantasy of the mother retaliating for these aggressive feelings. So, producing terror in the infant. So, this fear of retaliation drives the infant seek to repair, such as by seeking closeness or displaying affection, laying the foundation for the empathy and guilt later in life. So that's the um, ego and super ego integration. So in real life scenario, let's say a toddler who throws a tantrum because they are denied a toy. So the ego enables the child to perceive the parent as both a source of frustration for denying the toy and a source of comfort when the parents shoots them afterward. So this reflects the ego's capacity to manage ambivalence and maintain connection with the caregiver. The superego, the harsh superego might produce a sense of terror in the child, imagining that the parent is angry or retaliatory because of their aggressive behavior during the tantrum. The child may then feel compelled to repair the relationship, perhaps by seeking a hug or expressing affection. 'Di ba? Kung may bata bang may sala, no? So, they know the guilt na sa mga angga na sila sa ilang parent. So, developmental implications, healthy development with consistent and nurturing caregiving, the infant's ego becomes stronger and better equipped to manage anxiety. So, similarly, the harsh superego softens over time, allowing for the emergence of guilt and empathy instead of terror. So, this progression supports emotional stability and healthier relationships. Okay. Uh, for the Oedipus complex and Melanie Klein's theory, so differs from Freud's in both timing and emphasis. So Klein believed that the Oedipus complex emerges much earlier in development, overlapping with Freud's oral and anal stages. So rather than being confined to the phallic stage, so in her view, this complex is less about sexual rivalry and more about the infant's emotional relational dynamics with parental figures. So timing and emotional focus, Klein argued that the Oedipus complex begins in infancy as early as the first year of life and is shaped by the infant's interactions with the mother and father. So unlike Freud, who placed the Oedipus complex in the phallic stage around ages 3 to 6, si Klein naman suggested that it overlaps with the oral stage, feeding and dependency, and anal stage, control and autonomy. Okay. So for Klein, the complex revolves around the infant's fantasies and feelings about relationships with parental figures. So these feelings are deeply rooted in the infant's dependence and the mother and their awareness of the father as the third figure in the family dynamic. Okay. So for boys, a baby boy may have a fantasies about a close bond with the mother, the good object, and experiences the jealousy or rivalry with the father. So at the same time, he may also fear the father as the rival who might retaliate for these feelings. So girls naman, similarly, a baby girl will develop attachment to the mother but also harbor unconscious rivalry for the mother's position in the relation to the father. So however, the girl's relationship with the mother is more central in Klein's theory than in Freud's. Okay. Now, another example, if the father embraces the mother in front of a child, the boy might experience feelings of jealousy or rivalry, He may have fantasies of attacking the father to gain exclusive closeness to the mother while simultaneously fearing the father's retaliation. Sa babae naman, may form a deep bond with the mother as her primary caregiver. Over time, she might decide to share the father's attention and unconsciously feel jealous of the mother's position as the father's partner. Okay. So, to comparison to uh, uh, Freud emphasized sexual rivalry and desire, with boys fearing castration anxiety, and girls feelings incomplete without a penis. So, that's penis envy. Sa kay Klein naman nga view, shifted the focus to emotional bonds and fantasies. So, kay Freud, more sexual. No? Kay Melanie, emotional bonds and fantasies. So, her Oedipus complex emphasizes the child dependency on the rivalry with both parents shaped by the internalized good and bad objects. So, Oedipus complex highlights in Klein's theory the infant's early emotional entanglements with parental figures. So, rooted in dependency, fantasies, and emerging awareness of family dynamics. So, by placing the complex in earlier developmental stages, Klein demonstrated how even infancy is marked by rich emotional and relational experiences. So, successful resolution of these dynamics laid the groundwork for emotional maturity, empathy, and capacity for relationships in adulthood. Now let's go to critic. Of course, tanan nga may theory, may critics. So the limitation is Klein's concepts such as unconscious fantasies. Now, the eternal object relations are inherently abstract and subjective, so they are difficult, if not impossible, to observe or measure. So, this makes empirical validation of her ideas a challenge in the context of modern scientific methods. Okay, which rely on measurable data. Mas budlay sa measurable data. Okay. Sa Klein's work primarily focuses on the earliest stages of life, so particularly infancy and early childhood. So while her theories about object and relations and splitting provide a foundation for understanding early emotional development, they offer limited insight into later developmental stages kay because early lang gid kay Klein ang iyang theory. Okay, so you read other the implications, and for the concept of humanity, uh, Diyan lang kayo ko lang gatiko ang akon nga slides. Deterministic view. So this is the early mother-infant interactions largely determine personality. Okay. For the conclusion, Melanie Klein's theory, while it is groundbreaking, has limitations, of course, like every uh, uh, like other, theories sa para kay Melanie Klein has limitations that modern psychology continues to grapple with. So the difficulty of empirically testing, when you say empirically this based from the experiment, so it's difficult to have this on experiment and observe and measure the data. So this is the difficulty of empirically testing her abstract concepts, and the restricted focus on early childhood stages highlight the need for complementary theories approaches. So however, Klein's work remains a cornerstone in understanding the complexities of early emotional and relational development, even as its application to later stages of life requires supplementation from other frameworks. Okay? So, medyo ka, ano no, ka lawig sa nga ton nga yung one time ko lang si Klein paghimo. So may mga yun na missed ako. So ara nang thank you. Hindi na magulag ang mouse ng budlayan. So ano ni? Okay. Kamo na lang iban no study okay about kay Klein kay sa iba na theories kay because ang exam ta is from module 1 to 9. Okay. So because nga ti nag Christmas break tapos last time to may activity sa school hindi kita kamit plus this January naka-leave ako. Okay. So I hope that these videos nga naobra ko maka-help sa inyo. And of course, kamo gid mismo sa self nyo. Okay, class? So, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.